Marcello Gandini is credited with what some consider to be the most beautiful car ever made, the Lamborghini Miura. The mid-engine supercar put the company into the minds of enthusiasts and thrust the young designer into the spotlight. It has defined his legacy in a way, but he's done more to the Miura, much more. He's been in the industry for 55 years and counting, and in that time he's designed a few of the most iconic cars in history and spearheaded the aesthetic of an entire generation. Welcome to episode 4 of Industry Icons. Marcello Gandini was born in Turin on August 26, 1938, mere weeks before Giugiaro and a few months after Leonardo Fioravanti. The son of an orchestral conductor, Gandini was nudged to follow in his father's footsteps. He began learning to play the piano at the age of 4, but he soon became disenchanted with that life and turned his attention elsewhere. His father bought him an erector set when he was a child. They allowed him to build scale models of cars, trucks, and airplanes. He was captivated, not just by the aesthetics, but also by the structure and mechanics of objects. He soon had his mind made up. He wanted to be a car designer. There weren't any schools nearby that could provide formal training in this line of work, so he went freelance, taking on a number of odd jobs to support himself. It wouldn't be until 1959 that he would really dip his toes into transportation design for the first time. A well-off friend of his owned a Fiat OSEA 1500S that he raced often. In an effort to keep pace with the competition, he asked Gandini to perform a few modifications to the engine. Partway through the process, the friend suggested that he design a new, more aerodynamic body for the car as well. The side project gave him the confidence to show his sketches to the prominent coach builders of the day. Not much came through for him, at least not until 1963, when he presented the feud to Nuccio Bertone. He wanted to bring him on right then and there, but there were a few things standing in the way. He wanted to remain a freelancer, and a long-term position at the firm would have stifled these plans. Additionally, Giugiaro, the firm's incumbent design chief, was vehemently opposed to his hiring, even threatening to leave if Marcello were hired, so the opportunity slipped away. When Giugiaro departed for Gia in 1965, Nuccio pursued Marcello once again. It was tough to get a hold of him. Nuccio didn't have a number, nor an address to contact him with. He came to find out that he was doing work for Marazzi, a coach builder based in Milan. In November of 1965, he was able to lure Gandini away and appoint him as Bertone's head of design. The 1966 Geneva Auto Show was a landmark event for the design house, for they had 3 cars scheduled to debut there. Over in the Jaguar booth was the FT 3.8, which was requested by the brand's Italian importer. Bertone had the Porsche 911 Roadster in their own booth. Their 356 was being phased out in favor of the 911, and with it would go the popular 356 Speedster. Management decided against developing a successor. The 911 wasn't designed from the outset of the convertible, so serious compromises would have to be made to bring it to market. The rear engine layout meant there wasn't a place to store at the top. It would have to fold back above the engine, similar to the Volkswagen Beetle Cabriolet. Removing the top would also compromise the structural integrity. The company started working a variant with a target top, but a few voices internally felt that this wasn't enough. Johnny Von Neumann, the brand's distributor in Southern California, argued that there was still demand for an all-out open-top variant of the car in the market. He went directly to Porsche with his concerns. They weren't completely sold on it, so they authorized the construction of a single prototype and would make their decision based on how the public reacted to it. Neumann didn't take the opportunity for granted. He gave the brief to Bertone, who had the Roadster concept ready in time for the show. The donor car and the finished car look worlds apart. It trades in the exposed, upright headlamps for a quartet of bulbs partially hidden behind a retractable cover. The outermost lights are partially exposed to flash oncoming traffic. The differences are reflected in the profile view as well. In fact, the only thing giving away the underpinnings are the overhangs. On the coupe, the main body line slopes down slightly and the cabin stretches back to meet it. This helps it tuck the visual mass of this area way more effectively. On the Roadster, the deck also lowers slightly, but this area of the car still feels stuffy. This is only made worse when you realize that the rear seats of the donor car were removed to pay homage to the 356 Speedster. Bertone also modified the interior as well. The downs moved to a vertical panel flanking the driver. This lowers the height of the dash, but forces one to take their eyes further off the road to look at important information. At the show, Bertone said that the Roadster would sell for under $8,000. Porsche, meanwhile, unveiled the 911 Targa, which undercut the Roadster at a price of $6,170. Its fate was sealed, more or less. This was the only example of the car produced, and also happened to be the only Porsche styled by Bertone. Both of these cars pale in comparison to the true star of the show, the Miura. Lamborghini had made a bit of headway in the automotive world with the 350 GT. The touring coupe gave Ferrari some healthy competition, but engineer Gianpaolo Dallara wanted something more extreme. Prior to coming to Lamborghini, he worked for Ferrari and Maserati, brands with very prominent racing programs. He vocalized his desire to build a racing car. Ferruccio Lamborghini wasn't quite the racing fanatic that Enzo Ferrari was. He thought it would be too expensive to develop and take away attention from their main focus. Still, he allowed Dallara and fellow engineers Paolo Stanzani and Bob Wallace to work on a prototype chassis in their spare time. The car would use the same Bizzarino-designed V12 in the 350 GT, but it would be mounted transversely behind the seats. This brought the weight inward and freed up enough space for a cargo area at the rear of the car. They spent 6 months working on the engineering drawings, and the prototype was completed soon after. Lamborghini originally went to Carrozzeria Touring to skin the car. They had originally worked together on a 350 GT, so they hoped that this collaboration would produce equally pleasing results. Touring produced 2 asymmetrical scale models, with each side showing a different design, making for 4 proposals in total. None of them impressed Ferruccio. The company decided to put the bare chassis on display at Turin in 1965. Without a design for the car, they were courted by coach builders for the duration of the show. Everyone paid them a visit. Well, everyone except for Bertone. Lucio didn't even make his way there until the final day. He wanted to wait for the crowds to disperse so he could get a good look at it. He reaffirmed his desire to style the car, saying, "I will pin the perfect shoe to fit such a wonderful foot." Ferruccio gave Bertone the contract before the day was through. There were 2 factors that played a role in the decision. Firstly, Bertone was practically the only coach builder without major ties to Ferrari. Ferruccio also took a liking to the Alfa Romeo Kanguro and sought something just as inspired for his car. What he didn't account for was that the person that led the project had left Regia, and in its place was a 27-year-old designer with a sparse portfolio. There was also the issue of time. Lamborghini needed it ready for the Geneva Auto Show, a mere 4 months away. The aggressive deadline made the development process interesting to say the least. Engineer Piero Stropa created a package drawing of the chassis on the 20th of December 1965. Gandini drew the profile of the car directly on these drawings. Orthogonal sketches of the front, rear, and side were completed on Christmas Eve. On either the 28th or 29th, the sketches were presented to Ferruccio, who signed off on it. Work on the prototype began in January of 1966. Bertone felt the crunch of their tight schedule here as well. Many of their processes overlapped with one another. For example, the wooden buck that they used to shape the body panels was being assembled at the same time the one-to-one drawings were being completed. And considering the team also jugged the Porsche and Jaguar projects as well, it's a wonder how they managed to have the car ready in time. Lucio Bertone is said to have had significant input on the car. He would occasionally give suggestions on how it should look, but his input was often ignored by Gandini. On one occasion, the design was finished and the prototype was within 2 weeks of completion. Gandini thought it was as good a time as any to take a vacation. While he was away, Lucio made his way into the studio and made a few changes to the design. Now, he never elaborated on what exactly he changed, only saying that he changed it, quote, "to my satisfaction." When Gandini returned, the prototype was finished and was being painted. He was shocked, but it was too late to change it back. This story has been debunked. Gandini did go on vacation, but not until the car was completely finished and on the way to Geneva. According to the book, Marcello Gandini, master of design, fellow engineers maintain that no changes were made to the design by Lucio Bertone. His input started and ended with his suggestion to use lighting units for the parts bin. There were also some that question if Gandini designed the Miura at all. Some people give credit to his predecessor. Gandini says that the mix-up dates back to around the Miura's debut. A French magazine mistakenly credited the car to Giugiaro. Bertone promptly denied this, and even sent a letter to them saying as such. The magazine published this in a later volume. This seemed to be the end of things, but the controversy would turn up once again in 1996, when a journalist for Classic and Sports Car magazine laid eyes on a few Giugiaro sketches and suggested that he may have had a hand in the Miura. In this article, Giugiaro is quoted as saying, "Gandini took my sketches and finished the car. 70% of it is mine." In September of 2008, Automotive News Europe ran a story covering the construction of a full-scale mock-up of a car Giugiaro designed while at Bertone. The Miura is brought up in the middle. Essentially, the author says that the car was originally meant to go to Bizzarrini, but Lucio offered a car to Lamborghini instead. Giugiaro left during development, and Gandini stepped in and finished it. Marcello requested an interview to tell his side of the story. He said, quote, "I did the Miura, and I did it alone, in just 3 months. Any alleged influence by Giugiaro in that car is simply not true. Giugiaro himself was asked about the matter as well, and he said, quote, Gandini designed the Miura, and I've never said anything different to this simple statement, so I have nothing to deny." The flames were stoked again in 2012 when Giugiaro showed his drawings to a journalist from Car magazine. He was quoted as saying, "Since I left some drawings there, maybe he saw them, I don't know. Before the Miura, what did Gandini design? You were influenced by what you see, but each person has his own personality. You learn and create your own style. Gandini is an excellent designer, but unfortunately, he didn't go on to develop his profession further." This conflicts with an account in Maestro of Design. A particular passage reads, "Gandini is emphatic when he says that he did not see any drawings of a mid-engine sports car left behind by Giugiaro. Stropa also states that he was not aware of any such drawings. And he has been present when Giugiaro was around, after he left, and before Gandini joined. Stropa also points out that he saw Gandini draw directly on the chassis mechanical elevation drawings. We'll probably never know for certain how much direct involvement Giugiaro had with the car, if any. There's at least one element of the Miura that can be traced back to him though. If you watched my video on him, then you may recall the 1963 Chevrolet Corvair Tessuto concept. The lights lay flat on the car when not in use, and swivel up when activated. The Miura uses a very similar system. The car is also unlike anything he's done before or after. Prior to it, he did the other two Geneva show cars, the ESA 1000, various projects for Marazzi, and miscellaneous freelance work. His work immediately following the Miura sees the emergence of his own distinctive style. It's reasonable to assume that the car came from Gandini's own hand, but because he was still finding himself as a designer, he drew inspiration from other cars in the brief development process. This is just my theory. I'm very curious to hear your take, so please leave your thoughts in the comments section. At any rate, the Lamborghini Miura P400 made a splash at the Geneva Motor Show. We've already touched on the retractable headlights. They're flush with a bite of the reduced drag and tilt up slightly when activated. The lights themselves are actually sourced from the Fiat 850 Spider. At the top and bottom of the enclosure are thin black forks. Because of the way they curl up out of the body slightly and how light interacts with them, many enthusiasts refer to them as eyebrows. There are very minimal bumpers on the nose and boot of the car, and they're de-emphasized because they're integrated into the grills. They stick out ever so slightly on the side view, but they're still within the rhythm of the design. One thing you won't see in the body is a door handle. They're the very bottom slat of the intake behind the door. The prototype car had a plexiglass cover over the engine, but there were visibility and ventilation issues. Production cars had louvers that kept the engine dry and preserved the sliver of visibility that remained. The clamshell front hood and rear engine covers were aluminum while the doors and roof were made from steel. At the rear, we can see the first appearance of a styling feature that both Lamborghini and Gandini would utilize heavily in the future. The lower half of the rear clip has a hexagonal pattern. The shapes were elongated to allow as much air into the engine as possible. Right above this are taillights lifted from the 850 Spider. A Roadster version debuted in 1968. It received a warm reception at the Brussels Motor Show, but Lamborghini passed on it. The car was sold to the Letzing Research Organization. They were looking for a car to showcase their lightweight materials. Lamborghini wasn't willing to sell them a car off the line, but they did give them the Roadster. It was a one-off that they weren't going to go through with. It was collecting dust, so they were glad to get something out of it. Letzing dismantled the car, repainted it green, and replaced many of the parts with zinc alternatives. The company used it as a promotional tool for a decade, after which they sold it to a private buyer. It resurfaced in 1980 when it was donated to the Brookline Museum of Transportation. It was on display for a while and changed hands a few times afterwards. The car came into the hands of Adam Gordon, a New York property developer who took it through a $320,000 restoration, which saw it revert back to its original specification. In 2008, it was sold to a private buyer for an undisclosed price. Soon after the Miura project was completed, Ferruccio handed Bertone another assignment. He wanted to round out his lineup with a full-size 4-seat coupe. The fruits of their efforts debuted at the 1967 Geneva Motor Show, the Lamborghini Marzal. The car is based on the modified Miura chassis. The wheelbase was lengthened by 120mm to accommodate the rear seats. The new engine freed up even more space. Well, it's not really new. The 4-liter V12 in the Miura was sliced in half, creating a transversely mounted inline 6. A massive set of gullwing doors grants entry to both the front and rear seats. It has a staggering 4.5 square meters of glass. The door guard coming from the front end breaks to the mast and guides the eye around the car. It surrounds the body at its widest point, giving the brittle material a bit of protection. The louvers in the back sport a three-dimensional interpretation of the hexagon motif. The shapes are offset from one another and cascade down to the rear deck. The honeycomb pattern continues into the interior. It's directly referenced in the dash, but it can also be seen in the shape of the instrument cluster housing and storage compartment on the passenger side. Ferruccio liked the idea, but the Marzal show car was too outlandish for its taste. The Espada that debuted in 1968 was clearly inspired by it, but the weirder elements were left on the cutting room floor. The set of lights up front were replaced with more conventional bulbs. The wings were clipped in favor of standard doors, and the louvers are gone entirely. Hints of the show car remain and include the thin rubber guard line of the door and the sloping two-box architecture. Alfa Romeo was invited to present a car at the 1967 Expo in Montreal. They in turn gave Bertone Giulia chassis and asked them to work their magic. Two examples were sent out at the event. Alfa Romeo only intended for them to be show cars, but they received such a warm reception that they had no choice but to see it through production. The cars actually debuted without names. Montreal just stuck to the project sometime during development. It entered production in 1970. It's pretty close to the concept, but a few changes were made. The show car had thin stationary streaks covering the upper half of the headlights. The production car had fewer, thicker strips in place. The covers are retractable, moving down and tucking under the lights. Series cars also had reworked bodywork up front, more pronounced wheel arches, and thicker rear lights. The Alfa Romeo 33 Stradale is one of the most striking cars ever designed, but at a price of $17,000, the company had trouble moving them off their lots. 5 bodies were handed to a few design houses. 1 went to Ital Design, 2 went to Pininfarina, and 2 went to Bertone. They went to work with the first of these two in 1968. The Miura was well received upon its debut, but when magazine reviewers got their hands on them, they discovered a fatal flaw. The car had a tendency to lift off the ground at high speeds. Bertone's solution came in the form of the Alfa Romeo Carabo. The car trades in the flowing lines of the Miura for its chiseled, more dramatic form language. The nose of the car stretches far past the wheel and comes to a point. The silhouette of the car starts at the front and goes unimpeded to the back, where the rear overhang cuts in abruptly. The end result is a profile that appears to slice through the air while standing still. The car is considerably smaller than it appears. It's 165 inches long, 70 inches wide, and another 40 inches tall. Because of its dimensions, Gandini needed to get creative with the doors. There's a single hinge at the front and they raise straight up. They're so long that if they opened up like conventional doors, then entry and exit will become exponentially more difficult. This setup also provides greater access to the interior. The Carabo is one of the most influential concept cars in automotive history. Companies would adopt the signature doors and imitate the wedge shape. It was also the first in a decades-long line of wedge-shaped design studios to come out of Bertone. Lastly, it would usher in the most distinguishing styling trend of the 70s and 80s. Bertone finished out the 60s with the Autobianchi Runabout. The Autobianchi band specialized in homely, low-cost compact cars, so the hardcore track machine seems like a departure for them. It should be wearing a Fiat badge. They approached Bertone for potential replacement for the 850 Spider. It was a successful model, but they wondered what the car could be if it weren't tied down to the 850's mechanicals. Bertone essentially took the front-engine, front-wheel drive layout of the Fiat 128 and flipped it around, creating a mid-engine rear-wheel drive plan. The new setup improved weight balance by allowing for the spare wheel and fuel tank to sit behind the rear wheels. The styling bar is heavily from powerboat design. Its roll bar angles forward, and the entire lower half of the car has a metallic finish. The lights at the edges of the front end aren't the main ones. Those are actually placed alongside the roll bar. Autobianchi never built this car, but its parent company was convinced of the benefits of the new layout. A new car, utilizing the lessons learned from the Runabout, returned in 1972 in the form of the Fiat X19. Some traces of the concept remain outside of the shared layout. The wedge shape, while not as extreme as what was seen in the Runabout, still retains the front and the rear geometry first seen in the Carabo. Its seat pillar is also inspired by the Runabout's roll bar. Something that did make it through was the speedster layout. The concept was a stripped-down racer with a minimal windscreen and no doors or top. The X19 had to make compromises in this regard. The American market was critical for sports cars, but back in the late 60s and early 70s, there was fear that the country would ban convertibles outright. To skirt this potential regulation, the car left the factory with a removable top. This actually ended up being its benefit. It was an open-top car with the structural integrity of a closed-body car. Design houses always look for opportunities to forge new relationships with automakers. This is what compelled Bertone to create the garbage show car for the 1970 Geneva Motor Show. They spent about 4 months turning a 2002 into the luxury sports coupe. It looks so outlandish because Bertone wanted to push the BMW design language to its very limits. They're tall, angular hexagons that stick out from the body a bit. There isn't any visible material inside them, which further adds to their depth. Inside, the radio, cigarette lighter, and what I assume are air conditioning controls are replaced in a vertical strip that flanks the driver, allowing for a wafer-thin dash. Lastly, the Garage has perhaps the greatest glove box in automotive history. It opens outward, not down, and reveals a sizable mirror. Now passengers can be absolutely certain that they're ready for the occasion. The concept debuted to critical acclaim, but soon after it vanished without a trace. In 2019, nearly 50 years since the Garage concept disappeared, BMW head of design Adrian van Hooijdonk set out to recreate the car. He assembled a team comprised of members of his design staff, as well as a few people from BMW Classic. There were only a handful of photographs to work from, many of them were black and white. To really nail the design down, the team enlisted the help of Marcello Gandini himself. He pitched in details from memory, such as the champagne metallic paint. The recreation made its debut in 2019 and is now part of BMW's classic collection. Bertone sought to add another automaker to the Rolodex in the form of Lancia. They usually want to put in Ferrari and Zagato and haven't yet given them a chance. Nuccio thought it would be best to show them just what they were missing out on. They began to work on a spec show car without their knowledge. The name early on was Stratolimite, or limit of the stratosphere. Marcello and his team took the name in stride and brainstormed the ways they could push the envelope. They decided to carry this philosophy out in terms of its dimensions. The Lancia Stratos HF0 takes the already dramatic stance of the Carabo and pushes it even further. Another wheel can fit in the front overhang with plenty of room to spare. The bodywork takes an aggressive angle at the rear wheel and establishes the floor without rounding out. The main line is absolutely vital to the car. It tapers down the length of the body, which propels the momentum of the car forward and makes it seem like if it's going down a hill. The way the rear kicks up to meet it seals the deal. It makes a perfect arrow, which is just enough to push the body forward. The glass part up top swings upward, revealing a pair of nearly vertical seats and a face-up steering wheel. It's in this position to free up as much room for entry as possible. Once the occupants are in place, the driver tilts it toward themselves. The column straddles in between their legs, and the wheel comes up well past their knees. With the design finalized, it was now time to present the car to their unsuspecting clients. The story goes that Nuccio drove the car to Lancia's headquarters and attempted entry into a restricted area. He was denied entry, but rather than turn away, he simply drove the Stratos under the gate. The guards were likely too dumbstruck to do anything about it. Nuccio was able to get a meeting with Lancia's bigwigs, and soon enough they took the project on. The Zero will culminate in the development of the 1973 Stratos, one of the most successful rally cars of all time. Lamborghini wanted to replace the Miura with a car that employed the techniques used in the Alfa Romeo Carabo. The result of their efforts was the 1971 Countach LP500 prototype. The silhouette of the car is literally a wedge. It arcs continuously from the bumper to the rear deck. The front end has three intakes that are similar to the ones you might find on the smartphone. The Countach workmark takes the place of a fourth to keep the design relatively symmetrical. The hood diverges from the rest of the front end and goes into a large vent just under the windshield. The greenhouse tapers inward so aggressively that the glass doesn't have a chance to curve along with it, resulting in nearly flat windows that fit the car's geometric motif. Its rear lights are thicker than the rest of the floor. The pillar swings back to meet them at their highest point, creating a pair of flank buttresses, and you can always count on a Gandini design to have interesting wheel arch treatment. Visibility was abysmal. It was so bad that Bertone needed to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. Instead of rear-view mirrors, they installed a periscope mirror on the roof. This was directed toward a window at the highest point of the car. This didn't prove to be a very effective solution, as the driver would need to take their eyes off the road and direct their attention to the mirror. This was left on the cut-room floor when the Countach LP400 entered production in 1974, but the cutout remained. Other modifications include massive vents in the shoulders, NACA ducts on either side of the body, and a slightly more pronounced front bumper. In 1970, Lamborghini called on Bertone once again to design the Urraco mid-engine 2x2. Unlike the Grand Tours and supercars that they built their name on in the past, this new car was positioned squarely like the Porsche 911. They expected to sell 2,000 a year, but by 1974, only a few hundred had been constructed. After numerous attempts to breathe life into the model line, Lamborghini decided it was time to wash their hands of it and turn their attention towards its successor. They made it clear to Bertone that they didn't intend for the car to be a showpiece. Bertone took an Urraco off the line and shortened the chassis some 200mm. Lamborghini wanted the car to have Pirelli P7 tires. These wouldn't fit, so the car had to be widened an additional 110mm. Journalists got their hands on the running prototype and raved about the driving dynamics. Road and Track even went as far as to say it was the car the Urraco should have been. Lamborghini finally had the hit they so desperately needed. Or so it seemed. The oil crisis hit the company especially hard. Ferruccio was forced to sell, and the new owners had no interest in bringing the Bravo to production. They thought it would be a better bet to use the Urraco's architecture as the basis for a more focused sports car. Bertone removed the rear seats and added the targa top. Ironically, the Lamborghini silhouette would go on to become one of the rarest series production cars. 54 examples were produced between 1976 and 1979, and about 30 are known to exist today. Bertone also styled a midship 2x2 for Ferrari. The Dino 308 GT4 would be the first Bertone-style Ferrari since they had the regular 250 GT back in 1962. Along with this, they also commissioned a concept car. The 308 GT Rainbow is a development of Gandini's distinctive form language. When asked about his mindset when designing the Rainbow, Gandini said, "I did not see much point in designing a Ferrari that looked like a Ferrari, as the designers at Pininfarina and others were very much capable of doing so. If we had to do a concept on a Ferrari base, I believe that we needed to look at something radically different than what would be expected." Gandini didn't restrict himself to sports cars. In 1975, he designed the utilitarian Fiat Visitors Bus. This was created for the specific purpose of shuttling people across Fiat's sprawling manufacturing plants. It needed to be compact, comfortable, and have good visibility all around. 6 doors provided easy access to as many seats. The metal strip running across the body protects the rest of the car from damage. The bus was proposed as a replacement for the aging 850T, but it remained a one-off. Bertone used the other 33 Stradale body as the basis for the 1976 Alfa Romeo Navajo. The futuristic bodywork is made entirely from fiberglass. Glass dominates the upper half of the car, but thin pillars help establish the window. The roof flows into a set of massive spoilers that aid in drawing hot air away from the engine. Gandini has plenty of outlandish designs under his belt, but none of them can match the Lancia Sibilo concept. It was envisioned as a successor to the Stratos. The Stratos was right at home on the rally circuit, but the Sibilo looked like something straight out of Blade Runner. He wanted it to appear as if it were a single piece from a cast. The bronze color adds to this effect. Save for the bright orange strip going across the front of the car, all of the body is a single color. Bertone hand-sprayed the paint of the window to achieve the gradient effect. The only part that actually opens is the porthole near the end of the door. The wooden wheels add to the metallic feel of the car. The doors are made from plexiglass, and there's a bit of an urban legend surrounding them. Apparently, their glass supplier failed to meet their deadline, so Bertone had to come up with their own solution. In 1977, Bertone collaborated with Reliant on the FW11 concept. It's a 4-door liftback with a taller cabin and large windows. For a prototype to were constructed, but the FW11 would get no further than this. At least not in this form. Later that year, Gandini used elements from the project for the Jaguar Ascot. This car takes the FW11, removes a set of doors, and exaggerates the form. Jaguar wouldn't bite on this car either. The design sat on the shelf until 1979, when Bertone took on a brief from Volvo. Compared to the other offerings at the time, the Volvo Tundra may as well have been from another planet. Its grille has horizontal strakes and is bisected by the logo, but it's slow and offset to its right. Both of the A and C pillars have been darkened, giving the impression of a floating roof. The wheel arch treatment is of particular note. The carriage line bumps up against the front ones just enough to emphasize this area of the car. The line goes straight over the rear arches, lowering their profile and giving the back half of the car room to breathe. Compared to the Ascot and FW11, the Tundra rose in the overall dimensions and opts for softer surfacing. It looked like the shot of the arm the brand was looking for, but Volvo rejected it. Citroën had experience with unconventional designs, so they got into contact with the firm and requested something in a similar mold. 5 years after the Reliant FW11, the car finally saw production as the Citroën BX. The front end has a bit in common with the Tundra. The grille is on the lower part of the section, leaving the headlights, turn indicators, and offset badge as the only elements up top. The wheel arch treatment is similar as well, with the main bodyline going through the front ones and above the rear ones. The ones in the back have a pinch of Gandini's flair. It covers a bit of it and swoops upward. It diverges from the other cars a bit more round back. It enlarges the greenhouse by darkening a tone with the C-pillar, and uses 2 square lights to visually widen the car. The BX is by far Gandini's most successful model. It was offered from 1982 to 1993, and in that span, the brand sold over 2 million of them. The man himself would be long gone by the time it actually came to market. After more than 15 years at Bertone, Gandini stepped down as chief of design and went freelance. There was no shortage of work. Lamborghini looked his way when they were working on their next mid-engine supercar. His proposal was very much an evolution of the late 80s Countach. as evidenced by the angular surfacing and massive vents shoulders. Partway through development, the company fell under the control of Chrysler. They significantly reworked its design. The 1990 Diablo was a more reserved car by comparison. Many of the harsh lines were smoothed down, but Gandini's angle wheel arch made it through. Still, he was a bit slighted with how the situation unfolded. Sometime after leaving this project, he was invited to submit a proposal for the cheese-out V16T. The one he came up with was similar to the shown Diablo concept. This wasn't quite suited to the taste of company head Claudio Zampoli. The production car was a mix of both of their ideas. The front end is how Gandini intended, but the back is more of Zampoli's influence. He worked on a variety of other projects throughout the late 80s and early 90s. The bi-turbo-based Maserati Shamal has the distinction of being the final car that debuted in the 1980s. In 93, he designed the Nissan Abx concept. It's a compact, lightweight, aerodynamic study that has a coefficient of drag of just 0.20. In 1996, he designed the Di Tommaso big wheel prototype. It saw production in 1989 as the Cuvale Mangusta. I'll just come out and say it, this thing is a mess. The headlights, grille, fog lights, indicators, and side reflectors are all in close proximity to each other. The front end has no room to breathe. Many of these items also show up around back, and this area also has to juggle a set of rope bumpers. This aggressive side skirt is so far removed from the pillory surfacing of the rest of the car that it does seem to look stock. The design is definitely an acquired taste, but journalists at the time praised the Mustang Cobra Source V and sharp driving dynamics. It probably would have found a place in the market if it didn't launch with a starting price of $85,000. The Mangusta was a flop. Even the legends have their off days, I suppose. In 2001, he was presented with the opportunity to revisit one of his most iconic designs by Stola. They wanted to show the advantages of the newly developed epoxy resin that they claimed was superior to modeling clay. And what better way to get the word out than to make a splash at the 2001 Geneva Auto Show? The Stola S81 was a turn-of-the-century interpretation of the Stratos. They didn't have the rights to the use of the name, so they went with S81, which signified the 81st birthday of founder Alfredo Stola. It has an idle pass, but the S81 does more than enough to stand on its own. Compact LEDs gave him more freedom to experiment with the lighting units. The upper portion illuminates the road ahead, while the lower part serves as the turn indicators. The body cuts into them, creating a dynamic front end signature. The lighting unit around back is a continuous LED strip that highlights the surfacing of the deck. The wraparound windscreen is the most significant carryover from the original Stratos. That car had small side windows, but the S81 even puts those to shame. Instead of extending straight back, the daylight opening cuts about at an extreme angle to give way to the intake on the shoulder. And that thing leaves all the space it can get. Gandini and Stola would collaborate once again in 2005 on the S86 Diamante. Stola wanted to show prospective clients that they were capable of turning out quality work under strict deadlines, and went from idea to show car in the span of just 5 weeks. Recently, he was involved in the development of the Tamo Racemo concept from 2017. The project was shuttered because of cost-cutting measures at his parent company. They felt the resources required to bring the car to market would be better put towards their commercial vehicle endeavors. In his near 60 years of designing automobiles, Gandini has styled some of the most iconic cars of all time and helped maintain Bertone's position as one of Italy's premier coach builders. Marcello Gandini has left his mark at the industry and is certainly an industry icon.